we have started the recording. Okay. So again, welcome to everybody to the call. My name is Don Pratt. I'm with JBS International, and I'm your host today on this session. And today we are talking about the foster grandparent and senior companion volunteer study. So let's go through these slides, and if you are following along without WebEx, I will give you the slide numbers. We're going to go on now to slide number 2, which is our session agenda. So today we're going to do several things. We're going to give you sort of a general broad view of the volunteer study, some basic information that everybody needs to know. We're going to take you through the steps of data collection. They are fairly simple, but we're going to break those down so that we make sure you know what those steps are. And we're going to show you the full range of training and technical assistance resources that the Corporation for National and Community Service is making available to assist FGP and SCP grantees with conducting the volunteer survey. And then we will have a generous portion of time at the end of this call for any of your questions. And of course, at that point, we'll also take the mute off so that people can talk. All right, slide number 3, and this is again under overview. So to set the scene, CNCS is conducting large-scale evaluation of Senior Corps programs. And one component of this evaluation is the survey of volunteers, Senior Corps Volunteer Performance Measure survey. This survey is supporting strategic goal number 2, which is, and I quote, to strengthen national service so that participants engaged in CNCS-supported programs consistently find satisfaction, meaning, and opportunity. Now, the Senior Corps Volunteer Performance Measure Survey, or Volunteer Survey for short, will capture information on the benefits experienced by foster grandparents and senior companions. So this really is about your volunteers. And part of the rationale for undertaking this study is that there is a body of research evidence out there already that shows that older adults who volunteer do tend to experience certain benefits from doing that. And so this is an area where we would expect to find outcomes. Now, and we also have heard many times from Senior Corps grantees that you are aware in your everyday work that volunteers do in fact benefit by participating in your program. So CNCS is saying, you know, we're on the same page with you guys. We believe this and we've known it too, and now what we want to do is collect some reliable information that can help, you know, show this to other stakeholders out there, Congress and the American people and so on. So we know with a bit of planning and support, this would be something you can do. Moving on now to slide number 4, and this is again general overview information about the study. The study seeks to build evidence for the impact of Senior Corps, the value of volunteering, and the benefits of volunteering for people 55 and older. And a couple of the key questions that the survey seeks to address is how volunteering can promote a sense of one's ability as a volunteer to complete tasks and reach goals. And this is sometimes referred to as self-efficacy. Another outcome of interest is whether volunteering fosters a stronger sense of being connected to others. And this is a reference to social ties and perceived social supports. Now, we are doing this on a sort of one-size-fits-all mass scale. And that's important because if we can measure results the same way across all the programs, then we can demonstrate results program-wide. And, of course, then we can really make a big statement about our results. Another important and interesting aspect of this study is that, and we'll look at the survey in a moment, the questions that have been chosen for this survey, sometimes people do wonder why particular questions are in there, have been selected because they exist in another survey that the University of Michigan has been doing for many years. And so these are kind of standard questions that allow us to compare how senior corps volunteers respond to those questions versus another group who's been surveyed who are not volunteering. And this is a stronger design that should give us stronger evidence regarding volunteer outcomes for senior corps. So you're really helping to do something important by participating in this and assisting with this survey. Moving on to slide number 5, again, more overview information, and this really gets into your role as a grantee. We should note that the survey is a census, and it is intended to cover all, over 43,000 FGP and SCP volunteers. So this is big scale stuff here. And we have not forgotten RSVP. Any of you out there who might be connected with RSVP, don't feel left out. What we are really doing at this point is seeing how the survey works with the current group of volunteers, the foster grandparents and senior companions, and then we'll look at the feasibility of extending the survey to RSVP in the future. As an FGP or SCP grantee, you are required to conduct the survey. That said, your volunteers are not required per se to fill out the survey. It is essentially an optional thing for them. They should do it on a voluntary basis. So that means a volunteer could refuse altogether to do the survey, or they might see certain questions on the survey they prefer not to answer, and that's fine. That's their right. All that said, it should be kept in mind that our goal is to achieve a response rate of 85% or more. So the more volunteers we hear from, the more reliable our results will be. And we'll talk a little bit more about this issue of volunteers participating and optional and so on a little later. Let's talk a little bit about the dates around the survey. It has already launched. It started over a week ago, and we have essentially a 2-month window in which grantees can complete and turn in the surveys. So you'll want to work backwards from our June 17th deadline in planning your survey process. Let's go on now to slide number 6. And here we're going to talk about some of the resources that are available to help you conduct the volunteer survey. So we have set up, and we've already started to receive calls, we have set up the Senior Corps Survey Help Desk, and that's a toll-free number. It's on your screen. It's 800-207-0750. It's also included in the materials that you would download from the website. This help desk is open on Mondays through Fridays from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, and you can always leave a message during other hours, and we will return your call as soon as we can. If you prefer to email us a question, and we have been getting some questions on the email, there is an address that's monitored by at least 3 of our staff, so you can usually expect a quick response unless you're sending it in the middle of the night. And that is scsurvey@jbsinternational.com. And then, of course, there is the website. And I would like to actually just take you to the website right now. I'll put that up on your screen. Okay. For those of you on WebEx, you should be able to see now the Senior Corps Program Evaluation Resources website. This is actually a page within the National Service Knowledge Network, and this is basically a one-stop shop for any resources related to the Senior Corps evaluation. Currently, the resources we have up here are limited to the volunteer study, since that's the only study that's active at the moment. Of course, on the right here, you will notice the sidebar with our contact information, and then if we scroll down, we get to the section related to the volunteer survey or study. And basically you have a group of 4 resources at the top. The first one is one of the most important ones. This is the packet. This is the information packet. It's essentially your handy-dandy little guide to everything you'd want to know about how to conduct a survey. You also have here, I'm not going to point out everything, but you have here also a survey cover sheet, and then you have a section with a whole bunch of volunteer surveys. You have the survey in English, and then you have it in at least a dozen other languages. There is also a frequently asked questions document. A little further down, of course, we have the webinars that you know all about because you're on them. You're on one now. And then, of course, the PowerPoint slides at the very bottom. So let's take a closer look at a couple of these things here. The first one I want to point out is the information packet. So I will open that for you. And this is the face sheet, so you can recognize when we talk about the information packet, this is the document. And I'll just show you the table of contents here. If I can get, okay. So basically, what you have in here is pretty much anything you would need to know in order to do the survey. So there is the FAQ, that's section 4. There is the data collection steps. There are tips on successful survey conduct. And then we have a series of appendices. So some of these are really good pull-out resources, like the fact sheet, which would allow you, when you're, giving the survey out, to be able to answer questions volunteers might have about the survey. Another example is the cover sheet, the survey cover sheet. That's Appendix F. In fact, I'm going to show you that in a moment. But let me show you the survey itself. Oh, that's the cover sheet. Hang on, here we go. Many of you probably have seen the survey by now, and that's what's on your screen. So this is the survey that we're asking you to conduct, and it is a 2-page document. So, and it is, you'll notice it's got some little black boxes in the 4 corners, and all of your responses have to be filled into either little alphanumeric boxes, or you have to fill in the little circles. And you can use either, the volunteers can use either a pen or pencil as long as they, fill in the circles completely. We have been asked the question, can people use pencil? It doesn't have to be a number 2 pencil. So you'll notice in the survey there's a number of questions here that ask about the characteristics of volunteers. And then as we go on to page 2, starting around question 10 and beyond, we're really getting into some of those outcome questions that have to do with the benefits of volunteering. Now, as a 2-page survey, you could put this on one piece of paper. That is to say, you can double-side it. Or, if you print it separately, you'll definitely have to staple those 2 pages together. As far as we're concerned, you can do it either way, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go through the steps. The other thing I wanted to point out is the survey cover sheet, and it should be on your screen now. This is a 1-page form. Again, it is a machine-readable form, so you want to put your information in the little boxes or fill in the little circles. And whereas, of course, you're going to be submitting multiple copies of the volunteer survey because each volunteer will complete one, you may only have to submit 1 or 2 cover sheets, depending on your situation. That is to say, you put 1 cover sheet on the entire stack of surveys that you mail in. And on that, you're going to indicate your organization name and your grant number. If you have an FGP and an SCP, so that's 2 different grant numbers, you would need to submit 2 separate cover sheets for each respective pile of surveys. And there's a couple of questions here about how many surveys are you enclosing, how many active volunteers do you have, that's question number 1. And you'll also notice on here at the bottom the mailing address. So this is the address where you're going to mail the packet containing, that you put together and propose to John, containing the cover sheet and the completed surveys. So that this cover sheet then is obviously very important. All right, well, let's return now to our PowerPoint presentation. And we've had a good look at some of these resources. So now what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the data collection steps. And that starts with slide number 7. I think it's good to give you an overview of those steps, which are also duplicated in the information packet, just so that you can understand the process and you can ask questions today if you have questions. So looking at this kind of at the bird's eye level, there's three kind of main steps. One is preparing to conduct the survey. The second is actually conducting the survey, and then wrapping this process up, sending the surveys in and basically being done with it. Now, in my discussion of the data collection steps, I will, for a matter of convenience, assume that we're talking about a situation where you as a grantee are handing out the survey at a monthly in-service meeting. We do have information in the packet on how to do this by other means, but we do also believe that the in-service is typically going to be the best way for most grantees to do this, and so I'm going to talk about it in those terms just for convenience. Moving on to slide number 8. So, preparation consists of 4 steps, some of which are quite simple. Downloading and printing the surveys, making copies, determining who will distribute the surveys, and then scheduling a time to actually conduct the survey. So let's take a quick look at each of these 4 steps under preparation. And the first one, of course, is downloading and printing the survey. So you just saw the website where you would go to get the surveys. And so, of course, if you haven't done it already, you should download and print the surveys. And then, of course, you'll want to make at least 1 copy for each volunteer. And if you need copies in other languages, you'll need to make sure you get those as well from the site. And then determining who will distribute the surveys and prepare those people so that they can help. If you're a very small operation, perhaps you as a project director are doing this completely on your own, and that's fine. If you have a larger operation, you have multiple sites, various stations, there is the possibility that you would be asking some staff at those volunteer stations or sites to do some of this survey administration for you. In that case, you should consult the information packet, and there is some information in there that you can provide to them so that they can do the process properly. It is a simple process, but there are a few basic things that everybody needs to know in order to do it, and those are clearly laid out in the packet. And then, of course, the last thing is you want to schedule time at the in-service meeting to conduct that survey. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. What I actually wanted to say was that if you already have a volunteer survey, then you might be wondering what to do with it. And there are a couple of options. You may want to consider replacing your survey with the one the corporation is giving you. You certainly don't have to get rid of your survey. That's your choice. If you decide you still want to conduct your own volunteer survey, we would recommend that you not do it at the same in-service event as where you do the survey we're talking about today, because that might just confuse people. And it is important not to change the survey because this could affect the data quality and the consistency of the information. So let's go to slide number 10 and talk a little bit about making copies of the survey. As I said, 1 per volunteer. We did note it is a 2-page survey, so you could double-side it or staple the 2 pages together. Obviously, you want to keep those pages together or else it'll be messy when the data gets scanned. So if you're not double-siding, definitely staple them. And in case folks, mess up their copy and they want a new one, it's good to have a few extras around. Slide number 11, still under preparation, and this is determining your helpers. Again, if you anticipate that you will be having other folks help you with handing out the survey, then you want to consult that information packet and get some information out of that they can use, and in fact that you would use as well if you are going to administer a survey. And basically what you're going to be doing at the in-service is introducing the survey, giving it out, answering any questions volunteers might have about it, and then, of course, letting them have at it and fill out the survey. So, slide here we go. I told you there would be a poll. The poll question I'm going to put up now, and you should be able to see it somewhere on the right side if you are on WebEx. In a moment here. Open poll. Yes, there we go. So the poll is just asking one question. We're curious to know whether you have your own volunteer survey. And I'll give folks a minute or two just to answer that question. And then I will share those results so you can see what your peers are up to. And I can see the results are filtering in pretty quickly here. Okay. Just about 4 more people to answer and we're done. And I know we have a few folks on the call who may not be answering the poll, so I think we're basically done. So I will close the poll now. Actually, it's timing down to close. It'll close in about 10 seconds. I could give you the countdown. 7, 6, 5, 4. It's on my screen. You probably can't see it. And, okay, it closed. Now I want to share the results. And if you look on your screen somewhere to the right where you did the poll, you should be able to see the answers that we all gave for this question. And the clear majority of you already do a survey of your volunteers. And that's great. And what it means is then you already know to some extent how this process typically works, and a lot of the information that you have and a lot of the experience you have from doing surveys of your volunteers should indeed carry over to the kinds of things we're asking you to do today. Okay, great. Thanks for participating in that poll. And now I'll return to our PowerPoint and go on to slide 15. And this is our last step under preparation, scheduling time to conduct the survey. When you're planning that, you want to consider that from start to finish, the whole process would take about 30 minutes. So this includes the time you'll need to introduce the survey, hand it out, pass out any pens or pencils people may need, of course the time the volunteers need to fill it out. Our pre-testing shows that usually takes a volunteer less than 10 minutes. And then time to gather up and collect those surveys. Now you may want to schedule time across more than one in-service event in order to reach all your volunteers. So, for example, if your in-services happen at different locations or different times, then you may need to actually conduct the survey at those different events or in those different locations to ensure the maximum possible coverage. Don't know if I said it before, but I'm sure I'll say it at least more than once on the call. We are trying to get a high response rate, 85% or better. And you do, of course, want to work backward from that June 17th deadline. So then the main overview piece of this is conducting the survey itself. So on slide 14, that talks about distributing it, following up with missing volunteers, and then finishing up. So those are steps 5, 6, and 7. And on slide 15, we're going to talk about distributing the survey to the volunteers. So when you do that, you want to, of course, you don't just pass it out, you want to introduce it and make sure that volunteers understand that their participation is optional. Remember, we said that before. So they can choose not to participate, and they should be told that whatever decision they make is not going to affect their involvement in the program. So there's no consequences based on, oh, I don't want to do the survey, or something like that. Pass out the survey and give instructions on how to fill it out and what to do with the completed survey. Obviously, you'll be getting them back from them during the same event. There is some very nice information in the volunteer packet that you can use almost like a script, if you like, to, if that's more comfortable to you when you introduce the survey. And then the fact sheet, which is one of the appendices, has ready-made answers to a lot of the questions that you might typically get from volunteers about the survey. Now, there is the possibility that some of your volunteers will need assistance in completing the survey, and that might be folks, for example, who have visual impairments or folks who have literacy issues. And in that case, you may need to have someone, or maybe you, who reads the questions to them. So you should make sure that either you or your helpers are oriented and prepared to do that. It's a pretty simple process, but there is some good information in the packet to help you with that. Moving on to I was going to say step number 6, but we do have, I did want to interject in here an opportunity for folks to talk a little bit. This, of course, is completely apart from the Q&A, where you also have an opportunity to speak. And here I wanted to get into the issue a little bit about volunteering and volunteers who might need assistance in completing the survey. So you are free to speak up, and you may want to press star 6 to unmute yourself. Actually, I'll press star 9, 7.
All guests have been unmuted. You will now rejoin the meeting.
We'll try this. If we get too much background noise, I may have to mute the line, but then you can always unmute with the star 6. So what I'd like to hear from folks out there, especially those of you who have done volunteer surveys before, is which volunteers do you typically find need or may need some assistance, and how do you handle that?
Hi, this is Susan Marshall from Ohio.
Hi, Susan.
We actually have a very large number of our senior companions that are not Native Americans. We actually are planning on, we have in line some extra assistance for translation from our site stations.
So these are folks who might have an issue with the language issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And actually quite a large contingency. We're looking at probably 60 to 70% of our companions will not have primary English.
Okay. And I'm guessing that perhaps the various languages provided on the website don't cover your need as well?
Correct.
Okay. So how will you handle this?
We've actually asked some of the folks that help with translating at our site stations to come to the in-service that we're doing the survey in May so that they can help us with translating kind of as a table-to-table and individual-to-individual basis. So we're actually blocking quite a bit of time to give sufficient time that everybody who wants to participate gets the opportunity.
Well, that's great. And so am I understanding correctly that they will verbally translate, or will they actually provide a written translation?
We're planning on the verbal because we took the assumption that no changing of the document included no changing it in what language. So we're anticipating just verbal.
Okay, and that makes sense. That's a good point about not changing the written document. Any of you who do take a look at the other versions of the survey in Spanish and German and so forth, you'll find that only the English and the Spanish are scan forms. So any of the other languages are not scan forms. And so, but again, we do want to discourage anyone from changing the surveys as such. So that's a good reminder from Sue. This, by the way, does bring up a question some people have, which is, okay, you're telling me to put the scan forms in an envelope and mail it off so it can be scanned. What do I do if I have like some forms in French or Italian or whatever, and those are not scan forms? Do I do something different with those? And the answer to that question would be no. All of your forms, whether they're actually in the scan format or not, can go in the envelope that you send off for scanning, and then the separation and processing of those will occur at the other end. Okay, Sue, thanks for that contribution. Is there anyone else who wanted to talk a little bit about their situation in terms of volunteers who might need assistance?
Yes, and I haven't had a chance to call him. On my list. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I think we have somebody who's contributing, but I can barely hear them. If they could speak up.
Oh, we've only did 74.75 hours, so that's not enough. Not enough.
Okay, I think that's probably just background noise. Well, thanks for that discussion. I think we'll move on, and I will put us on mute so we don't have any background.
Would you like your guests to be able to unmute their own lines by pressing *6? If yes, for all guests have been muted. You will now rejoin the meeting, your lines, by pressing *6.
So let's talk a little bit more. We're still on that issue of distributing the survey to volunteers and conducting the surveys. This is step number 5. When you are distributing the survey, you'll want to do your best to get full cooperation. Of course, volunteers can still choose not to do it, but there are things you can do that will encourage volunteers to understand that there's, no particular reason to be concerned. So you can make sure that volunteers know that they are not being required to give any identifying information. They're not putting their names on it or anything like that. And that the information they provide, you should tell them, is confidential and will only be reported as part of a larger summary of results. Another question related to distributing the surveys is, how do you know who's done it or at least who's had a chance to do it, and those who you might need to still follow up with because they were not there? Well, at an in-service, if you typically have a sign-in sheet or an attendance form, that would be a great way for you to know, okay, here's all the people who were there, and so they either did it or at least they had the chance to do it. And then, of course, anyone else who didn't mark their name on the sign-in sheet or didn't on the attendance form would be somebody who you would want to follow up with. And again, that might either be at another in-service event, or it might be something like you send it in the mail, or you do it over the phone. Again, the information packet has instructions about how to do it in a variety of ways. And again, I did mention this when we talked about the cover sheet. If you are a dual grantee, if you have both FGP and SCP, and particularly if these folks are going to be attending the same in-service event, there is the risk that the forms will get mixed together. And we say it's a risk because we actually don't want that to happen. You can hand out the survey to a mixed group of SGP and SCP volunteers at the same event, if that's what's going to be happening for your program. But if you do, you will need some way to separate them. One clever idea is to print out a set of these surveys on, let's say, white paper and another set on, like, a light blue paper, so they're different colors, and then making sure that when you give out the surveys, you only give, like, the white to the FGP and the light blue to the SCP, and then, of course, no matter how they come back, once you get the completed surveys, you can easily separate them into two piles. And then, of course, you'll be able to put separate cover sheets on the two stacks, put them in separate envelopes, and mail them. So that's a good little trick to remember. Slide 18, following up with those absent volunteers. Well, there's bound to be a few, so if you want to do your best to get a high response rate, we do encourage you to use like that sign-in sheet to track who did or did not respond. One thing you want to be careful about is to make sure that it doesn't get filled out twice by the same volunteer. Obviously you should check with a volunteer if you're not sure and say, did you already fill this out? If they say yes, then of course they should not do it again. The last step under conducting the survey is finishing the collection. And so if you have, again, multiple sites, this may involve some coordination and reminders to your volunteer stations. So, you send out the survey to those stations, but you need to do some follow-up to make sure that they get those surveys back to you. And you'll want to also check the quality of the data when it comes in. And we do recommend, if you have kind of a distributed situation, that all the surveys funnel back to a single point, like you, the main project director, and that you are then the person who's responsible for actually packaging them up with the cover sheet. Don't ask your sites to do that. Ask your sites to send the surveys back to you so you can be the central point for mailing them out to the scanning service. But as you get those surveys in, it does really help to check the quality of the data. And this is a very simple process. We're asking you to quickly look at the forms and make sure that the circles are filled in. If somebody just puts a little X or a little stray mark, they might not be read correctly by the scanner. So we would actually ask, if it's clear that somebody meant to answer a question because they made a check mark, but they didn't fill it in, we would actually ask you to go and fill that in yourself. Now, I know that could be a tedious process, but if you really stress to them when you hand out the survey, hey guys, make sure you fill in those circles completely, you'll have a lot less work later on to clean up that sort of thing. Now, if you see a question on the survey with no answer, then you should assume that that was intentional and not try and put an answer where it's clear that it's not at all clear what they meant to do, or that they, even if they meant to answer it. So only, of course, when you see a mark that clearly looks like an answer, but they didn't fill in the circle, would you be going in there and, taking your Sharpie and filling it in, finishing the job, basically. So the last thing here under the data collection steps is wrap up, and this is pretty simple. It involves filling out that cover sheet and mailing the thing in. So, as far as that process goes, on slide 21, we have kind of a graphic showing you what that involves. And so, for each of your grants, you're going to fill out the cover sheet with your project information. And it does, you might recall on the sheet, it says it has a place to put in, quote, organization. What do we mean by that? We mean your sponsor organization, not your project name. You will have to fill in the number of active volunteers, number of completed surveys you're packaging up with the cover sheet, and basically there's also a little circle where you can indicate if this is all the surveys you plan to send or if we should expect more. So in fact, you can batch them and send them more than once if you get one batch in 1 week and then another batch the next week. Or you can just wait and send them all at once. If you do that, as long as you make sure that any surveys you're not sending immediately are kept in a safe place so that you can find them when it's time to send them. So that is essentially from soup to nuts. That's the data collection steps. And on slide 22 here, we have a tasks list and schedule. It's a sample. It's a tool that you can use. It's in the packet. You can actually take it out of the packet and adapt it if you want to tweak the dates, tweak some of the instructions, and you can use it as a checklist to help organize the process for you. And again, working back from that June 17th deadline is really a key thing to remember. So again, here are our resources on slide 23. There's the material on the website. We really encourage you, if you have any question, no matter how silly it might seem, we'll answer with a straight face, I promise, because sometimes these are simple questions or things we haven't even thought of, and it's good to know what those are because they might end up in our FAQ. So please do not hesitate to call or email the help desk if you have any questions or you need to talk through something and get some advice. Okay, well that is our presentation for today, and we still have a good 15 minutes left. So at this point, I think we can open it up to our Q&A, and that means this is your chance to talk, or if you send any chat messages, we can check on what those are. And since we did have some apparent background noise the last time I did a global unmute, if you want to ask a question, I will ask you to individually hit *6 on your telephone to unmute your own line. So maybe before we get into the verbal questions, we'll just check in here and see if anything has come in through the chat. And I see a couple here. Claudia may have gotten some too. Claudia, did you get any questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions, Don.
Okay.
Somebody wanted to know, are pencils or pens okay to fill in the survey? And I think you mentioned earlier that it can be either. It doesn't have to be a number 2 pencil. Either a pencil or a pen. It doesn't matter. As long as what we really need is for them to fill in the little circles.
Right.
So that was one question. Another question was somebody wanted to know if they should make a copy of all the completed surveys before they send them out. And, I mean, this, you don't have to. You can if you want to. It's not something that we're asking people to do. And I just, there was a reminder, too, in this question, they had thought that the forms should go to CNCS. Don't send the forms to CNCS. Send them to digital documents, and that is the name and address are on the cover sheet that Don showed you. And it's also in the packet, too, and in the FAQs.
Right.
And then, Don, I had one last question. Someone wanted to know if or why names are not included on the forms. Why don't we ask people to put their names on? Because that would make it easier for them to track who did a survey and who they have to follow up with. Well, I think that probably that they wanted to keep this survey anonymous because some of the questions seem a little personal, and I think that if a survey is anonymous, people feel like they can answer more honestly. So it does kind of put the burden on project directors to sort of figure out who had an opportunity to get a survey and who didn't. But it also makes the person filling out the survey feel more like they could be more honest. And I think that's why they made that decision.
Right. Clearly some trade-offs there, but that was the reasoning for not putting the names on the surveys. And in fact, we don't need that information. I know that might be somewhat useful logistical information for the grantees putting the surveys out to their volunteers, but we're hoping they can find other means to do that. Okay, great. Was that everything you got, Claudia?
That's right.
Okay, because I got 2 or 3 myself on the chat, and one person is asking, am I right to understand that those of us who have FGP and SCP should mail the surveys in 2 different envelopes? And the answer to that is yes. We would ask, I can imagine somebody could take, a stack of SCP surveys and put a cover sheet on it, and then take a stack of FGP surveys and put a different cover sheet on that, and then put them together in the same envelope. I'm saying it's possible, but what we really prefer is that you actually mail them in separate envelopes. I hope that's not too inconvenient, but that is our preference. And then we do have a kind of a related question from another person, which is who is responsible for the mailing cost? And don't shoot the messenger. Hopefully it's not going to be a heavy expense, but we are asking folks, the grantees, to actually, put the postage on that and do that, to bear that cost. And I guess if I can, reach for a silver lining here, we're not asking you to, I can say a couple things. We're not asking you to analyze the data, so we are taking considerable burden off of you there. And then probably the question that raises in many people's minds is, so how will I find out my results? And the answer to that is, we are going to generate those results for you and get those back to you. Now, the details of that are still being worked out, but my current understanding is that if at all possible, a sort of overview of the results will be made available at the Senior Core Virtual Conference. And also, at some point, hopefully not long after the June 17th deadline, we will also be able to email back to the individual grantees a little mini report just about the results for your program. So there are plans in the works, and we can promise you that you will get the results. And I think that was all the questions I had on chat. So we still have about 10 minutes left, so if anyone would like to just, hit *6 and unmute yourself and then ask a question over the phone, you're welcome to do that.
Hi, this is Colleen Baldwin. Are you able to answer a question about the contents of the questions?
Can you rephrase the question? Are you saying when you give out the survey, if people
So
ask...
I have a question about why number 9 is worded such as it is, and I'm wondering if that's something you can address.
Okay, well, let me first of all get the survey up on the screen so we can all look at the same thing. Okay, that's the cover sheet. Okay, question number 9. Yes, how many hours do you spend per week did you spend in the past, per week in the past 4 weeks doing volunteer work, and then you've got the 4 choices. Okay, so that's the question.
And my concern is that it's going to weaken any data collected because it combines all of their volunteer service, not just their senior corps service. I'm concerned that this will not come out with very strong data on here is what senior corps did, because it could be speaking about so many other opportunities.
Well, this is an interesting question, and when we did pre-testing, there were similar questions raised about this one. And I guess what I can say is that because we know that all of the respondents are in fact senior corps volunteers, kind of as an either or. You are a volunteer or you're not. We already kind of have that as a constant across the entire population that we're surveying. So we know then that regardless of how their volunteer service gets sliced and diced across various programs or activities, it is in fact, they are in fact senior corps volunteers. And I think another factor at work in this question is that we needed to match it as closely as possible to the Michigan survey, and that did put some constraints on how we could rephrase the question. So I acknowledge that there are some relevant or legitimate concerns about that, but there were also those constraints at play.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I should also mention that what we're doing now is kind of an exploratory process, and we know that based on the feedback we're getting from grantees and the feedback like yours is precisely the kind of stuff that we're kind of cataloging. That feedback and also the way the survey performs, like if we see across a whole bunch of programs question number 9 or some other question is a lot of times being left blank, that is part of our learning process and the corporation's learning process as an exploration of conducting this survey that could definitely affect the decisions we make about the survey going forward. So this is great to hear. It's good and valuable input.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I guess there are no more questions, so I think we'll wrap up at this point. I do want to thank you all very much for attending today. We will be putting a recording of this up in a week or so you'll have this as a record. It'll be on the website that we showed you. And again, please do not hesitate to contact us at the help desk if you have any questions or need any assistance with the volunteer survey. And good luck, best of luck in doing the survey. Thank you.
Thank you.